Hi folks, in this video we discuss Beauvoir's reference to Candide and the line, cultivate your garden. What I want you to do is pause your videos and try to figure out what Beauvoir thinks about this. Does she think it's yes saying, no saying, accurate, inaccurate, nefarious, superfluous? What is her fundamental view of this quote? So pause your videos and think about this before going on. Okay, that was your chance to pause your videos. I think her ultimate line, she actually literally says it's superfluous. But what does that mean? And why does she say it? What is the philosophical ramifications of that? Let me say the first thing she says about being not very helpful is because we don't even know what our garden is. She says, what is your garden? And it seems like that's her first objection to it. I think that's actually a superficial comment. It's an interesting question, but she takes it as a foregone conclusion that it has an answer. She thinks there's actually a whole deeper level on which the quote is not helpful or superfluous, unnecessary. It doesn't really serve a purpose. I don't think any of these other ones really completely capture what she has in mind. I mean, maybe the second best answer to me is that it's an accurate point. She does want us to be actors in the world and take responsibility for our actions. So that is what cultivating your garden sounds like. So I think taken in one sense, this is a kind of congenial point to her. For example, look at some of the things she says about building a house or working the earth. Even if there's a house that I didn't build, when I engage with it, when I become an actor in the world, intimately connected with it, then it becomes my house. Or if I work the earth, it becomes my earth. My relationships with others, when I work at them, they become my kin or my friends, my neighbors. So the world is what we make of it. And if you want, nothing is given to you. It's up to you to create it. And I mean, this is really beautiful. Creating it minute by minute is really an amazing way of recovering the temporal and the importance of the temporal in the human condition. So if you said it's accurate, there is a way in which it's congenial to Beauvoir. That's great. I think it's a wonderful little mantra. But on the other hand, she fundamentally says it's also superfluous because you can't, anything you cultivate is therefore your garden. The concept of your garden is not something given or fixed either. It's just what you make of the world. So in that sense, it's totally unnecessary advice. In a sense, the advice to cultivate is what she's telling us. That's the positive Beauvoirian dictum here, is do the cultivating, because as such, the question of whose garden is what is thereby settled. There is no further question. You don't have to go find your garden and then cultivate. You just have to decide on your projects. You have to pursue projects and then start working them. Okay, now connected to this idea that we create those relationships, let me give you some other quotes from Beauvoir that speak in the same direction from this piece. And they highlight this idea that working the finite temporal world, being engaged in it, developing those attachments, is what we need to do from an existential point of view. That is how we gain fulfillment. That is how we live authentically in Beauvoir's worldview. And so at that level, I think there are two interesting questions that she poses. I mean, she asks this question, what is my garden? And then in another version of it, which I think is quite beautiful, she says, who is my neighbor? This is, of course, a reference to Jesus's advice to the disciples, where Jesus says, love thy neighbor, love your, and that's the old King James, thy and thou. Love your neighbor is literally what the translation of the Greek is. And then the question that the disciples would ask Jesus in Beauvoir's view is, well, who are my neighbors then? Sure, I'm totally ready to love them. You got to tell me who's my neighbor. I think both of these are versions of the question, how do we create meaning in our world? And what is the basis on which we can create meaning? And how do we relate to the world, like this question of the garden, and others, the question of the neighbor? So I think there's an interesting way in which these are distinct questions. And I'll work up to them in stages to see how Beauvoir wants us to become meaning creators and then resist a kind of total nihilism. This view, total nihilism, is something we've encountered before. I'm just using that as sort of a tag to refer to the view that there's no meaning, period, like full stop. There's no meaning whether it's absolute or relative or whatever. This is the inference. It's the inference. This is what I call the second thesis for Nietzsche. This is the kind of nihilism that Nietzsche doesn't even endorse. But we can imagine somebody who endorses this sort of idea. If there is such a thing, then we cannot become meaning creators, because if there's no meaning, period, nobody can create it. So the sense in which others are not one's neighbors and the world is not even one's world, those are consequences of this kind of total nihilism view. And that's why I've labeled this like Camus' stranger is perhaps the total nihilist, when even not just others, but the world itself seems foreign and not one's own. One is not at home. One has no place in the world. Okay. Now, moving beyond that, you might deny total nihilism and say, no, there is meaning in the world, but it's not that other people have intrinsic value. It's just you. You are the subject. This is the solipsistic, the wildly individualistic, the passionate person's perspective. Yes, I have freedom and I have responsibility, but I only have responsibility to myself. And I'm going to then start creating meaning for me. And everybody, your meaning is yours. And you can try to become a meaning creator too if you want. So the world, this is not really Camus' stranger in the sense that I think this person doesn't feel foreign to the whole world. They are the tyrant who feels entitlement to the whole world. But instead, but they divide the line between themselves and others and everyone else. And my way of explaining what Beauvoir's view is, she wants us to move beyond this perspective too. And what she wants to say is, not only can the world become yours if you cultivate it, but others can become yours too. Your intimates, your friends, your loved ones, your compatriots, as long as you contribute to your relationship with them. If you cry over the other, then the other is not a stranger to you anymore. I think this line is fantastic. It's my tears that decide. But this puts it in terms of actions, because Beauvoir tells us you can't just identify with another person in words only. You know, when she talks about identification in some of those passages, I think what she means is mere identification, like the guy who reads in the newspaper about somebody climbing the Himalayas and says, oh, great, I feel like, they feel the sense of accomplishment for humanity as if they had climbed the Himalayas on behalf of that other person. Well, that's mere identification. That's just like mouthing the words. But for Beauvoir, if you are contributing something, if you are actually shedding a tear, you are doing something. You're not just parroting hollow words, but you are engaged in the world, engaged with others. Then that does make them your neighbor. So Beauvoir wants us to not only answer by the first question positively, by engaging with the world, she wants us to answer the second question positively too. And indeed, she thinks this is the only way of being an authentic person. So when you accept, we said her view is all about the ramifications of freedom and responsibility. And what that means for Beauvoir is you need to contribute to your own open future and positive values and positive freedom, as well as that of others. It's the second question, I think, then, that really divides her from Nietzsche. And that's how we can see that she has a kind of social consciousness that makes her at some level more akin to Dostoevsky, even though in other ways she's more akin to Nietzsche. So she really does belong here up in this upper quadrant. And if you understand that, then I think you've got a basic grasp of Beauvoir's view. Okay, thanks.